I'm honored. One of my mentors during my time in government, the Honorable Karen Evans, what an honor to share the stage with her. And just Landon meeting over the last few weeks is one of those hidden in plain view gems. Anybody in this room who wants to know about some activity happening from a mission perspective in the State Department, great guy, and you're going to learn more about that. So before I do this, just come on up. We only got about 30 minutes, so we're going to try to pack it in and make it a discussion, because these folks can, just their bios alone can take 30 minutes to talk about. So with that, the Honorable Karen Evans, United States Department of Energy Assistant Secretary. And wherever, Karen. And Landon, Senior Advisor, Landon Van Dyke from the State Department, and recently, or should I say, I'm kind of stealing his thunder here, the head of analytics, the Center for Analytics at the State Department, which is a new entity. So what a great opportunity. Welcome, Landon. So I don't read bios, but I have to just kind of intro with what I think with Karen here, and Karen, you know, when I pass the baton, she'll tell you a little bit. Her organization sounds very compelling when you understand the acronym, CSER. But also, Karen was our United States first ever Chief Information Officer. You've probably read or heard about Karen over the years. Like me, grew up in government, but ascended to the White House, briefed the president, and I had an opportunity to work with her when what was really the birth of what I call IoT, IPv6, the Internet Protocol version 6, was really hard to explain back in the day when Karen asked me to help lead a task force. It was really IoT, but it just wasn't as sexy. And now everybody wants to talk about IoT, and IPv6 is still around, but it's something that's near and dear to our hearts. So Karen, why don't I just want to pass that off before I introduce Landon, and then talk a little bit about your role, because as the Honorable, this organization, which is looking at the energy sector, not necessarily just the department, is where a lot of this IoT deployment and need for secure communications is being born out of, and under Karen's leadership.
Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity this is kind of an interesting setup. So I feel like I'm being rude to this half of the room when I look at you guys and vice versa. So I'm excited. I'm the first Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. Secretary Perry established the office in 2018, February of 2018, and the purpose of the office is twofold, really, is to fulfill the statutory requirements under the FAST Act of 2015, where the Secretary has very specific authorities as it relates to the energy sector. And then also, energy is the sector-specific agency, so right now, as the hurricane is happening, we are ESF 12 under the National Response Framework, and so we are fully activated in a 24-hour cycle, so that's the response portion of our job for natural disasters. But our office is responsible for all responses, both natural and man-made. So that's the cybersecurity part. But the energy security part deals with the fact that the United States now is energy independent. And so if we have energy security, that'll equate to national security as well. So the Secretary is very focused on the national security mission of what the Department of Energy does. So when you say about the department and the enterprise, I am not focused on DOE enterprise activities. The DOE enterprise activities are under the Chief Information Officer. I am focused on the energy sector, and that includes electric, oil, natural gas, and we have 3 ISACs. So we have the electric ISAC, we have the oil and natural gas ISAC, and we have the downstream natural gas ISAC. And the reason why that's important is because our energy mix has changed, and so we have switched. So I think it's now up to 46% of our energy is generated through natural gas resources, and so that interdependency is what's really important. But we're about all energy sources, so you will see that the department is also talking about nuclear energy as well as fossil energy, renewable energy. So it's all sources so that we can remain energy independent as a nation.
And that's just the start of it. That's like a Cliff's Notes of the coolest agency, in my view, in government. I've worked in several. But thank you, Karen. We're going to get back to that because there's some really compelling topics that touch us less as a government, but more as a nation in terms of critical infrastructure. I just want to kind of cliff note a few things in between, and my job is here to kind of be part of the conversation. If anybody has a question or we say some acronym you don't understand, please let us know. There are 16 critical infrastructure sectors in our country that are deemed the most critical assets, God forbid something happens, and you can read about them on an DHS website. Karen leads one of those efforts or one of those sectors when she talks about ESF 12, and that's outward facing, operational technology. How does it impact our country? The Department of Energy and all the others, and there are, according to the Federal Register, I have a little factoid, 449 agencies in the government. So don't think there's just some CFO acts. A lot of these align in a very unique way to those sectors. I'm pulling a Karen Evans out by giving some factoids when you start a facilitation. But that being said, think of critical infrastructure, 16 sectors, and a lot of agencies align to those. Our colleague here, Landon Van Dyke, amazing gentleman I've gotten to know in the last, say, 2 weeks. But again, when you think about calling on the government, for those of you who are in that business of collaboration, there are hidden gems in the mission area. Karen worked in the Executive Office of the President. Landon worked in the Executive Office of the President. Landon now works at the State Department with a great gig. And Karen works, yes, at a Department of Energy and worked in several before. There is a clear, distinct role and a differential between working in and for the White House direct and in an agency. And what Landon's doing, I think we'll hear. Give yourself a little intro here, what your 15-year journey's been like in the government.
Oh, I'm not going to do that. No. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here as well and to hopefully hear insights from everybody that I'm looking at as well, because as much as I like to talk about what we're doing, I always like to hear what everybody else is up to. Initially, I was working for the State Department as their Chief Sustainability Officer, or the person that was looking at their operations, looking at ways we can do better metrics and do it effectively and efficiently. We eventually stumbled upon smart meters early on, and we said, okay, well, let's do that. And of course, we didn't know that was part of the IoT hemisphere at the time. We were just calling it the smart meter network. Eventually, we moved on into building management systems, air monitoring systems. If you guys have ever heard of the air monitoring systems in China on the embassy, telling you how clean the air is, those are our sensors on those embassies. What we tried to do as we started building out further all of our sensors was to recognize that we're in 190 countries around the world. It's a State Department. We have an embassy in 190 cities, 272 cities. We have a diplomatic mission consulate building. We have over 26,000 buildings around the world. And all of those we needed to figure out how to monitor and make more efficient, optimize, and protect. And that's basically where the IoT network started to really expand, as we recognized that our footprint around the world needed better protection and better information. We also recognized we're in markets all around the world where many times those countries are trying to tell us we could never do any of this. And we're like, no, actually, you can do an IoT network in your own country. We have it at the embassy. You can come take a look. We'll show you guys how you do sensors, how you do generators, how you do building management systems, air monitors. So it's been quite a fun journey for us to not only use the technology and try to secure it for our own use, but also to be able to share it around the world as part of our diplomatic mission, and hopefully encourage people to take a swing at some U.S. technology and know-how and solutions. And from there, I'll feed it over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you. And again, we can talk for a while on this. I'm going to pivot back to Karen. When I see IoT, personally, I think of integrated operational technology. Internet of Things, there's also an industrial Internet of Things, which again is very apparent to us, the three of us sitting up here, and there's a distinction. So, Karen has a DNA that you could argue kickstarted the cybersecurity domain in government. But Karen also talks about supply chain security, advanced manufacturing, risk mitigation within IoT environments, a broad swath. So, Karen, I think for this group, you brought it up, the outward facing. Can you talk a little bit about that integration and why your role looking outward bound teamed with the IT side of the house, the information technology, is so important?
So the way that we're approaching this challenge, so, Internet of Things, industrial Internet of Things, operational technology, I'm very focused on operational technology. The market is pretty mature as it relates to cybersecurity and risk mitigation and how it deals with information technology. And so where you have to look at, and this is what we're looking at, this was released in the Director of National Intelligence Worldwide Threat Assessment. So if you read it, I talked about this a little bit yesterday at another conference, which I haven't memorized, seriously. At the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, it talks very specific on the bottom of page 5, China's capabilities in our critical infrastructure and what they're able to do. And on the top of page 6, it talks very specifically about what Russia is mapping out as it relates to our critical infrastructure in the energy sector. So when you look at those two things, you're saying, okay, well, how am I going to be able to detect and protect? So go back to the NIST framework. And so I'm trying to get ahead of the curve. So looking at where is the market doing really well, and it's with IT, right? So cybersecurity, IT solutions, you're all talking about sensors, all this other stuff. Where is the intersection? So it's where companies are trying to take advantage of efficiencies, right? Using the IT, the cloud, putting out all these other things. And then it's the nexus of where IT crosses into OT. And in the OT environment as well, it's highly regulated. And so operational technology, energy, electric, there's NERC standards, you have FERC, you have all this. So it's highly regulated. So generation, so think of us as generation, transmission, and then distribution. If you look at generation, it's highly regulated. And so that there's a different mindset into how am I going to secure that, how am I going to deal with that. And there are definitely consequences associated with non-performance. So you have different consequences, and we could talk about all the different breaches that have happened in the IT world, but there are different consequences for operational technology people in the energy sector. And so that's where we're looking at it, because how can you gain the efficiencies, deploy all the technology? So I'm talking about generation and transmission is also highly regulated. IoT is in distribution. So you brought up smart meters. This is a lot of things. Smart meters and everything behind the meters are not regulated, right? But that's all a new attack vector. So when you look at, so I'm looking at it as, whoa, this is a new attack vector, right? Because it has to plug in, because eventually you're plugging into the grid. So it's cool that we're going to have solar panels. It's cool that we're going to have wind turbines. It's cool that I have a Nest system in my house. It's really cool that I can control the temperature from my phone. All of those devices end up connecting in eventually to the grid. Like, it's great that I have an EV car that has to charge. Each one of those ends up becoming a new attack vector into the grid. So that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, a little
that's
bit, right,
what
Karen?
We're
Just a little
at.
bit.
Well, I'm trying to make it relevant to the Internet of Things.
Everybody nodding, no one's pecking corn. I hope this is making sense. So I loved it. So that was actually a great segue, and none of this is scripted. So Landon, the acting head of the Center for Analytics, we were talking just outside about the government's big on AI and machine learning and yada, 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 and the cloud and putting data up there and being cloud smart and so forth. But Landon was talking while I was writing something down he was saying, which was none of it really matters if we don't have the skill sets, and AI and machine learning are truly effective when you have lots of data to distill. So to Karen's point, a lot of the threat landscape has expanded. I'm going to pull the Karen out here. McKinsey, potential economic impact of IoT, 3.9 trillion to 11.1 trillion by 2025. PwC spent $46 billion in 2015 in the auto industry sector alone on IoT. And every second, apparently, and I don't have the quote resource, but it was about 127 devices are connected to the internet. Now, we may like an app, to your point, the kids and the thermostat. but they don't understand that, okay, it's cool to have that. When something bad happens, then who's at fault? Is it a regulatory body? People like to point the finger. So we as citizens are looking for the features and creature comforts, but the data will hopefully, as Karen points out, as we collect it, maybe talk a little bit about what you have an objective for with all this data coming out, Landon.
Oh, thank you. For us, we're looking at the data and we're saying, okay, if I'm ever going to make a baseline picture of any of our operations, for instance, the building management systems for our embassies, we're gathering about 15,000 data points every 15 minutes, just the various sensors that are going on, and we're creating a database back here. For us, we're trying to figure out what information do we really need to be key triggers to understand the efficiencies, the safeties. If there's something bad that's about to happen, we want to know. If insider threat has come in and turned the machine on and said to the machine, turn on every 15 seconds or every 15 times every second so they can destroy the machine, we need to be able to know about that ahead of time. If the operating system of various Siemens systems happen to be outdated, I'd like to know about that. For us, we're using machine learning to basically identify what the baseline of what is normal for our embassies is for the course of a year, essentially. So we get these seasons in there. And for us, understanding the cybersecurity issue, someone gets a hold of our building management systems, at an American embassy, the gates come down, the doors open up. We can effectively evacuate an entire building because I've, gotten a hold of your machinery. And then that opens up for other attacks and, physical attacks. So for us, we're very, very much worried about what the attack vectors are, what's being plugged in. Many of the equipment that's showing up in our buildings are Wi-Fi ready, and sometimes the contractors have them turned on, and we're not even aware of that. And so machine learning is helping us identify these particular elements, and we're trying to create algorithms, essentially, to modularize on different parts of our systems. So like we would have HVAC, or we'd have water, we'd have elevators. And at some point, over the next year, we're not going to want to keep pushing data through this bandwidth issue. We have all of this data that's coming through. We want to minimize that. And so with machine learning, we can identify, do not send this information unless it reaches this threshold. And then when it does, send it every second. And that way I know what's happening on a incident basis, not on a snapshot basis. But the only way we can do that, and this kind of leads into where we're heading, is we're taking the AI machine learning element and we're putting the AI part on edge devices on the actual site to actually execute the actual AI module. So we're kind of building it in the cloud because we have all that computing space. But once it's been developed and matured, we're modularizing it and then putting it back down on the ground and then have it check in once a day, right? So that's where we're heading with the machine learning, but we can only do that with large gobs of data. That's where IoT really helps us. And as we're building that out, the skill sets within the State Department, and the center in particular, will continue to develop on how to do machine learning and AI. And so that's where we're starting.
What I took from that is opportunity with IoT to have more data for actionable intelligence, awesome. Applied intelligence, which is where we get into software-defined networking or human-machine interfacing, is sort of where things go. Like, do I have to do something? And pivoting back to Karen, I'm going to ask the question is, Karen, you're out there talking to utilities, right? You're talking to these entities that keep our homes warm, our water drinkable. What does the utility industry or that industry think about IoT? The folks that have been working in a place for 30 plus years saying, not in my backyard, we
Actually, they have it deployed. The energy sector, so the whole idea of public-private partnership, we always say it all the time in Washington, D.C., it's real in the energy sector because I don't own any of this infrastructure. It's all owned by private industry. So I have a deeper appreciation for what public-private partnership means, okay? So they understand exactly what the landscape is, okay? They understand exactly how these devices are being used, and they know how they're being held accountable. When we start talking about, like you're talking about doing a baseline and how you're doing a bunch of different things, I have a research and development component. They have a very real function of they have to keep the power on. Okay. Right now, we're dealing with a hurricane situation right now. The way that the energy sector is constructed is they have mutual assistance agreements. You're seeing it live on TV. When it moves from one area to another, they all back each other up. They get it, right? And so, and what they need the government to help them with is how you go cross-sector, to your point about the multiple critical infrastructures and how are you doing this thing. So when you look at what we do, that's why we have like the Tri-Sector Initiative, which is talking about, and the National Cyber Strategy talks about specific things, but it's talking about energy, power, and then it talks about telecommunications, and then finance. So those are the three big key things that have to be able to work from a nation perspective all the way down to a community level. Like if you don't have power and your cell phone's not working and you can't get to your bank, that's a problem, right? Like that's the same problem nationally and internationally. So the way that we're looking at this is not maybe necessarily baselining it, is looking at, okay, there is a lot of data and everything is a sensor. So I know everybody's talking about, well, I'm going to deploy a sensor, I'm going to deploy. I mean, like, the approach we're taking is sensor agnostic because every single one of these things is a sensor. Anything out there can be a sensor. All I really need is the health of what is happening in that particular area and then be able to get information and be able to then define what is not necessarily normal and then be able to get the anomaly sent locally to the utility and then roll it up from a national perspective so that I can see what the trends are across. And then the value that the government brings is being able to look at that and infuse it with intelligence. So that's the government specific piece that then can make it actionable back out to a utility. So that's how we talk about it. So you know that they're going to deploy. I mean, come on. People want solar panels on their house, right? They're going to go, so I'm going to go shift into supply chain risk management. What do? You go on to the internet and you say, I want XYZ type of solar panels for my house. And then you get a list of them. I don't think the average consumer then says, wow, these panels are manufactured in the United States, so they're more secure. These panels are now manufactured over in another country, and they are less secure. They look at who's giving me free shipping and who has the cheapest price, right? So who's ever offering free shipping, and I can get it there in the fastest time that I need it so that I can then deploy it. That means that those of us involved in this have to take a longer term view. So that's like our advanced manufacturing initiative. If I can get advanced manufacturers to start thinking about their own supply chain and how they are doing certain things so that when the consumer buys a product, the risk is already mitigated so that they can deploy it, that's how we're approaching the problems.
So, and please jump in there, Landon. One of the things that Karen, again, during my time in government, would emphasize is building cyber into any engineering. And I think recently NIST has come out. I think I just saw Ron Ross posted a version 2 of 800-160, which isn't a bad read if you want to read. And again, I always say read the exec summary, if nothing else. It talks about engineering cyber into products.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to pivot to that because one other thing during her, I'll say walkabout post White House, Karen and I used to get together and talk about technology due diligence and what was happening in a lot of the product markets where products are being built every day to do something really cool. And we tend to not think about when you download that app and read, I know everybody reads terms and agreements when you download a cool app that somebody, your neighbor said, hey, you should use this, it unlocks your car for you while you're sleeping. But that's why risk management and mitigating risk, not eliminating risk.
No,
and I'm hoping.
Mitigating, no.
Yeah, so
exactly.
Go for it, Lynn.
You know, actually, it was kind of funny. You were talking about the solar panels. So one of our bigger concerns is, you know, a solar panel that actually, you know, you have the little silicon on them, but you don't know if one of them actually has more of a receiving chip on it, where I could be flying over with a drone, shoot a laser, Remember, software is zeros and ones, right? So that's where LED lights become an issue for us because it can be turned into a Wi-Fi system, right? Just as a laser can transfer, or a photon light beam can be transferred into a program. So I could actually infect your energy grid as long as the solar panel has that receiving end. And then I'm following the up and down waves of the electricity because it's, again, zero and ones all the way in. And so those are the things that the whole government and DOE is leading, because we got our information from DOE. We're looking at 35 embassies that are running solar as a resilience factor, but then we sit back and go, okay, well, when did we install those? Where did those come from? And so, there's a little bit of a backfill for a lot of people that sit there and go, okay, we do have all these vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities. How do we mitigate it? And so then it's going back to the architecture again and figuring out how we can do that, but then looking at the supply chain going forward and figuring out where do we find our suppliers. So
I would say to all our WWT friends as well, this is a very cool office and building, by the way. When you think about, and full disclosure, I'm on a public sector advisory board with colleagues, and we talk with industry like WWT how to call on agencies. And it's the end of the fiscal year. We were joking about it's the end of the year, and buyers are there. It's not the time to be trying to sell. A capability like this is we called it the marathon, right? There's plenty of documentation developed in concert, to Karen's point, on public-private partnership, from NIST documentation, which can be tough to read, to collaborative documents out of the White House, through NITRD and places, and OSTP that bring in. Karen used to have these. No, I never got to go to one, but it was all these really cool round tables with I wasn't supposed to be there. She was running with all these really cool people who run multi-billion-dollar organizations. Use cases. Commercial industry is leading a lot now, and government is not in that unique position of saying we will lead. The government is arguably compliance and regulatory focused. So to my colleagues here, and I'm going to say with 12 minutes and 57 seconds, there will be a parting shot. So Karen and Landon, think about your 30-second parting shot. We are going to open for some questions, but I'm going to pivot back just for a minute here to Landon, saying, sustainability. Do you have some use cases you're excited about that you're seeing, hearing, or learning of in other parts of the world, with regard to IoT, that the government will probably benefit from learning from?
Well, we're doing, I was just mentioning resilience, and so, we're looking at using sensors for flood planning and planning. We most of the time we build an embassy, hopefully it'll be around for 50 to 100 years, and so we need to have a better understanding seismographic-wise and floodplain-wise, what we're doing. In addition to that, we're taking advantage of geospatial and sensors and satellite information at the same time. So we're tying them together to get a better understanding of, what is the integrity impact, or the impact on integrity of a building, because we understand the natural wind flow through an area, things like that. Those are fun sensor stuff that we're doing on sustainability. We're also doing vehicles. Flo, the progressive lady, right? So she has the click it thing that tells you if you're driving safe or not. And we evaluated that for the fleet. We have about 14,000 vehicles around the world. And we said, yeah, that's great. Going back to supply chain, we said they're, in our case, not secure enough for what we need. So we actually had to go back to the drawing board and look at the actual circuit and pull out the chips that we did not like and replace them and rewrite the chips and then put them back in and then put them out to the fleet. So now we're deploying a fleet device, IoT device, that will tell us, are we braking nice? Are we beating up on the car? When is the maintenance requirements? Everything from when you buy a new car these days, they automatically calls over to the dealer, and all that information gets uploaded to the dealer. For the U.S. Embassy, we're sitting there going, we probably don't want that information just uploaded to a local dealer, right? So our devices are indicating to us also, what does the car want to do? Like, who does it want to send information to, and what type of information?
The connected car with 100 million lines of code in some IG report. Karen, a theme here, and again, for industry, we always like to think, we talked before we came up here, what are you taking away from this? I'm not going to speak for Karen or Landon and say, hey, go grab a cup of coffee with them. They'll probably cut you a check because you got some cool IT. It usually doesn't work that way. Maybe it does in some places, but
It's a beer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beer. Okay. Whiskey, if it was me. No. So storytelling. So Karen's talking about what's happening outside of the halls of the DOE. She's the energy sector specific ambassador, evangelist, subject matter expert. Landon's talking about sensors for floodplains and things. These are the missions of government that impact the citizen, the consumer, the person. Karen, have you heard during maybe post-disaster? I mean, sometimes bad stuff happens to learn how we can improve. I was down in New Orleans last year, and they're still rebuilding a city and making it smarter after a bad thing that happened. And some people I hear in industries that we've talked about are, well, that didn't happen to us, and we're not going to invest an extra penny because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Have you in some of these, and I used to see early on, right when you hit the ground running, Karen, you're at FEMA headquarters, disasters happen. Is there a what are we going to learn from this before, or do you anticipate? And what happens after? Is there a how can we protect better and be more predictive?
So we don't wait just for a natural disaster or a man-made disaster to happen. One of the other areas that I have, so I didn't go into my total portfolio, but I also have EMP, GMD. I also have all the workforce issues, and I have exercises. So we don't wait for a disaster to happen. We exercise those. So on areas that we're not, like, for example, the secretary has the authority in a grid security emergency. So everybody's going to say, what is a grid security emergency? Okay, that's a great question. We published a rule for what it is. The president gets to declare a grid security emergency, but it's going to require data to say, hey, it's got to come up and say you should declare a grid security emergency. So we're in the process of doing that. And then what kind of policies do we have to jointly develop with industry that we would execute during a grid security emergency? Some of the other work you were talking about, a lot of modeling, we have the national labs. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what we do is we model the what-if scenarios. We have a grid modernization initiative, grid modernization lab consortium. So it is modernizing the underlying infrastructure associated with the grid. Part of that is doing the modeling. The other effort, another sister office, is in conjunction with Department of Defense, has to define what the defense critical energy infrastructure is. So that means that we have to work with private industry because DoD can sustain itself, sustainability for several days within the fence. The minute they're outside the fence, they're back into private industry. So then how are we going to do, this is how we work with DHS overall for the National Risk Management Center of those functions. When you see those functions that they release, you model it, and then you start modeling, okay, this is what happened, this is what we see. So a lot of the things that you're talking about with the natural disasters and what happened prior to me getting there is they know, okay, the initial event is when the hurricane hits. The secondary event is the flooding that happens, right? So you can model the flooding. Then in the response is how do you go in? You turn the power on, so then the power companies know, and then DHS, because they have telecom, we share that information. Okay, here's where the power companies are going, then the telecom companies follow them. This is going to be something as simple as if the telecom companies go in first and then the power companies come and they cut each other's cable, well then, it's not helpful, right? It's not working. So it takes a coordination. So something as simple as the power companies knowing where the telecom companies are going and the telecom companies knowing where the power companies go, it brings up services a lot faster. You can model those. You share the information, and when we're in a situation like we are right now where this is a long-term event, the last thing, the secretary talks about this all the time, is that is when we're most vulnerable, because this is when our nation is focused on a natural disaster. We rely on technology to bring everything up. So when are you going to test if you want to see the resilience of the United States and the resiliency of the American people and our critical infrastructure partners, and how are you going to do that? So the sectors are aware of that. I mean, there's a lot of, so that's not a simple question to answer, because there's a lot of lessons learned that get applied and rolled in and exercised, and then we get tested in a situation that we're in right now.
in summary to me, Karen mentioned ISACs. Everybody know what an ISAC is? And there's, I think, other terms for this. That's your opportunity to get involved in the discussion. The agencies can create documentation. You can go hear Karen speak. But public-private partnership opportunities exist. The National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence up in Gaithersburg. Go visit that place.
Yep.
That's all but an academic incubator that not many people know about. There's a lot of logos there that aren't federal agency logos helping define standards.
There's a lot of energy companies out there. A lot of energy
Yeah.
companies participate and use it.
Yeah, I live in Gaithersburg, not a bad gig for me to visit and pop in and say hello. So we've got 4 minutes left. Are there anybody ready for a question or two? Because, okay, we have one. No, we don't. You're saying
the mic.
right here, the mic. Got it. We have a question.
Excellent presentation. Good to see you. Always great to hear you, Karen.
Oh, thank you.
This question is more directed toward Landon. Given the threatscape that you're dealing with, how are you managing innovation? Quantum computing is right on your doorstep. All of a sudden, encryption goes away. I mean, how are you dealing with the unknown unknowns?
The unknown unknowns. Most of the time, we're fumbling about fixing the unknowns that we did not know, which are now known.
Cycle.
Yeah, it's a cycle. Yeah.
That was good.
No, I think where the team that we have together right now have way more interest and foresight on new technology on the horizon. I'm just very fortunate to have a team that's constantly coming back to work going, hey, I heard about this new technology. And then we're like, that's a really great technology, whether it's the LiDAR or the LoRaWAN. And we immediately start thinking, okay, we need to do a proof of concept, see what we could do with that. And so we do have a dedicated team. It's just an R&D team that's constantly looking to the future and trying to figure out how we would integrate that. And what I'm always telling the teams that are building tools for us today, I'm like, don't build it specifically for the topic of the day. Build it for a future, make it future ready. So it needs to be more robust. We need to, instead of, in the coding world, it'd be like hard coding a word rather than having a variable and waiting for that new variable to come in. And that's constantly how we're looking at our infrastructure. And so, yeah, we do identify risks at a certain point. We immediately put the R&D team on it and we say, all right, no one's done anything with it yet, but let's see what we can do. So. Just lucky.
We have one more question, and the mic is going. Oh, do we have another question? No? Yes, great. We have a taker.
So this is for Karen in regards to Caesar. How are you guys handling things like crash override and Destroyer, and how can IoT help in large-scale grid attacks like Russia was doing on Ukraine?
So we have run a specific program. We have CAT. So I knew somebody was going to ask me here. So you'll hear me talk about Coyote and CAT, and I made sure I wrote these acronyms down. So CAT is our Cyber Analytical Tools and Techniques Initiative, and Coyote is Cybersecurity for the OT Environment. So we ran a pilot with industry. We had 3 pilots. We looked at the data. To get to the short, we came up with, to your point, 3 use cases. We, based on those use cases, and so we leveraged the national labs. They've looked at those use cases as it relates to the known knowns and the MITRE attack tree as it relates to operational technology, where there are 47 attacks associated with that, right? And based on the 3 use cases, and 120 data pieces that we think are critical, those 3 use cases will identify greater than 50% of the known knowns today. So if I then develop technology solutions associated with those to be able to automatically do it, so that gets to your, I keep telling you, we have a research and development thing, which is really cool from the labs, and then partnering with industry and stuff, is we look at software-defined networks. We have a quantum computing network that we're testing, quantum key distribution, how you can then do a bunch of these things and have self-healing networks as you define them, so that you can actually pick up the data while it's in transit, set back the configuration and fix it so that it never has to actually come into a database. We're in the process of testing those now. And so then it's getting industry to deploy it. So we had 3 companies that stood right up and said, yeah, we're on board, right? And so that's how we got to this point in the last year. Then by taking that, so you guys are familiar with Dragos. They're part of the 11 projects that we have that are dealing with modernizing the grid that we awarded last year. We just announced the lab call recipients. That was a $35 million initiative, several initiatives that just went out, I think, last week, and we're in the middle of an industry FOA right now. So we look to see where it is, then and then partner with our industry partners. We have an R&D roundtable that's a voluntary piece that comes up. They're all gathering in Minnesota to be able to look at that. And so so it's taking all of those, but you're trying to shift the dynamic because I'm back to those are the known knowns. We want to clean out the noise from the system and get into what we don't know so that we can detect and then protect before there is an incident.
Okay, we have 30 seconds, and I will do my parting quick shot while Landon and Karen think of theirs. Just because I think there's some good summary reading material for you folks after today. Definitely check out NIST or NISTI or 8228, Considerations for Managing Internet of Things, Cybersecurity, and Privacy Risks. Executive summary, not a bad read. Draft NIST 8259. These were both released in the last 2 months. Core cybersecurity feature baseline for securable IoT devices, a starting point for IoT device manufacturers. And if you're a services industry, how to deploy and implement these. Visit the NCCOE for sure up in Gaithersburg. They're currently working on a Securing the Industrial Internet of Things project, and it's cybersecurity for distributed energy resources, which in translation speak is DER as the acronym, but stuff that's not connected and all over the place but needs to communicate over wireless comms. So with that, those are my homework assignments. Landon, parting shot? What do they want to remember you by?
Cheapers. No, I would just say on the IoT front, obviously it provides great information, security, efficiency gains, but the architecture behind it, you really have to identify up front. Where's your demarcation? Where are the areas where you're willing to say whatever, and where are the areas where you really want to focus both your security and you recognize that's your attack vector. Once you have that, then you can go to town with the analytics. And
Download all the apps
That's
you want.
right. Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
Karen?
So I would offer for folks to go to the Department of Energy website and read some of the stuff that we have out there in the Office of Electricity, like the North American Resiliency Model. That's out there so that you can see the modeling, look at some of the work under energy efficiency and renewable energy, because I'm trying to make sure I don't give you all the acronyms, but that's where you'll see the work that we're doing jointly with them as it relates to advanced manufacturing. And then my own website, we do have the Hurricane Hub out there right now, so if you want situational awareness for that, that's there. But a lot of the things that we're talking about today, the projects and those types of things, and then our multi-year cybersecurity plan is out there for the sector that we worked on with the sector. So if you, it really is important for this public-private partnership, and if you can think about the dynamic a little bit about not necessarily incident response, but how do we detect and protect so that we can be able to detect what we don't know versus trying to fix the known knowns, but because that to me is noise in the system, so I want to clean all that out, right? So that I can get and really be able to see what people are trying to do, whether it's espionage, intellectual property, nation states. I want to make sure that I have a method and a process where I can learn what I don't know.
And with that, drop in the mic, which we won't do. I want to thank Karen, the Honorable Karen Evans. I want to thank my colleague and new fast friend, Landon. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you folks took something away from today, and we look forward to working with you in the future.